Give you the thumbs up.
All right, let's go ahead and get started today. Thank you everybody for attending our NRS Tables 101 webinar. We're going to go over a few of the NRS tables. We had a meeting, a data administration meeting last Monday, and we talked in depth about all of these, and we kind of wanted to just give an overview for those that weren't able to participate and not able to attend, as well as any of the teachers that weren't able to be there as well. We kind of want to give an idea and some background of these NRS tables. Our hope and thoughts are that we can start using these NRS tables to do data digs into individual programs. These are the tables that we report up to the federal government, so we want to introduce you guys to these tables and to be able to have you guys understand what's on these tables. So we'll go ahead and get started with a few definitions. Some of these are definitions that you'll see throughout all of the NRS tables. So I kind of want to just make sure everybody's on the same playing field, so to say, with what when I'm talking about periods of participation, POPs, MSGs, and reportable individuals. So with that, as you can see on the screen, a period of participation is a student can gain a period of participation by having 12 hours and a pretest. Once they hit those 12 hours and a pretest, they end up forming a period of participation. A period of participation can last more than 1 year. So a student can go, say, 3 or 4 years in one program continuously and keep one period of participation. As they go from year to year, there doesn't need to be 12 hours and a pretest every year. That period of participation stays open as long as the student stays active from year to year. On the flip side of it, a student can also have more than one period of participation within a year. So if a student has 12 hours and a pretest, gains a period of participation, and then stops coming, and if they have a 90 days of inactivity period, that will trigger a new period of participation if the student comes back. When the student does come back, though, they do need another 12 hours and a new pretest in order to start a second period of participation. So when we look at some of these reports, some of the reports deal with a single period of participation. Others of these reports are dealing with all of the periods of participation that happened within multiple years. So when you run these reports in your own program, just be cautious that when you look at it, the 500 number that you see is not necessarily 500 individual students, but it could just be 500 different periods of participation within the same year. Continuing on with measurable skill gains, we call them MSGs. You will see there are two different ways that a student can gain an MSG. The first one is the most, I wouldn't say the most popular, the most common would be the educational functioning level, so the EFL gain. The majority of the students will get this by doing a pre and a post test. When a student comes in, of course, they take the pre-test. When the student post-tests in any one of the tests and they make a gain going, say, from ABE level 3 to ABE level 4, that's considered an EFL gain, and the student then captured on, we'll show you table 4 where you can start to look at these. Another way that students can gain an EFL gain is by awarding credit. Now, I can't give you the exact number of how many credits a student needs to gain throughout their period of participation each year. We are still in discussion with Octay about this, and as soon as we have a more defined definition of about how many awarded credits a student needs to have, I will send out a new newsletter with the information. That way you can start using that for some of your higher end students, your ABE level 5s and 6s. This would probably be their main way of probably getting an EFL gain. The last one that happens periodically, not as often, is the participant needs to exit out of adult education and they need to enroll in post-secondary during the program year. So if a student leaves your program, whether they've graduated or not, and then goes into a post-secondary, now that could be either a university or a technical college. We can get information from both. And as long as they do that within the program year that they left, and it gets reported in Utopia, then a student can also show having earned an EFL MSG. So those are 3 ways to gain the EFL MSG. The other one that you'll see inside of Utopia is called, it'll be marked as an HSE, and a student will gain this by either having a secondary school diploma or by gaining their HSE. In the state of Utah, that's the student will take and pass the GED test. The last definition that we'll go over, at least right now, are reportable individuals. There's a table that we've started collecting data for that is titled All About Reportable Individuals. These are students who either didn't gain 12 hours or they didn't have a pretest in the year. So if a student doesn't essentially activate their period of participation, their POP, in a single year, the student doesn't show up on a lot of the federal tables. There is one federal table we'll go over today that does deal with these reportable individuals, and these are students who didn't gain the 12 hours in a pretest to activate a period of participation. All right, moving on. This is Table 1. All of these tables, Danielle has made a PDF and sent out.
So I just put in the chat box the link to a file on the Google Drive where they can access that.
Okay, so Danielle has made a PDF, it's attached in our Google Drive, that you are able to download. It's more of a definitions type of PDF in which it just kind of explains roughly what each table is. In NRS table-wise, we always we call these Table 1, Table 2, Table 2A, and we know what's on them, but a lot of, when you're learning these tables, it's hard to understand. When I'm talking about Table 1, it's what information is on this. And so the PDF that Danielle has put together is the definitions on what this is. And it's usually just the titles up at the top. So, for example, on Table 1, you can see that it's participants by entering functioning level, ethnicity, and sex. And so that's all this table is, and that's kind of what the PDF works. So I wanted to let you guys know that that information is up there, as well as it has some definitions, period of participation, MSG, and a few other definitions as well. So that resource is available for you guys to download now. To get back to Table 1, so Table 1, as I said before, it deals with participants with their EFL, their ethnicity, their sex. So their entering educational functioning level is all dependent upon what their pretest, their lowest pretest level is. So if a student takes, say, a CASAS test and they score an ABE level 2 and an ABE level 3 on both of their tests, they will be put into the ABE level 2 line, as that is their lowest functioning level on their tests. So that's the right side, or the left side of this table. The top is all demographic information that we collect on all of our students. So what ethnicity they are. If a student classifies themselves as more than one ethnicity, they get put into that far right column called more than one race. So if a student classifies themselves as a Black Asian, then they will be put, instead of into Black and Asian in one of those columns, they actually are put into the more than one race column. As well as any student who identifies as a Hispanic Latino. So if they're a white Hispanic Latino, they are not stuck under white or Hispanic Latino individually. And in fact, in this case, they're not stuck under more than one race. They are, the Hispanic Latino is, I would say, the primary race that we report on this. So this is all identified by what the student identifies themselves as. It's all demographic information that is all collected on the intake form. Moving on to Table 2. Table 2 is participants by their age, ethnicity, and sex. So just like Table 1, the top of the ethnicity and the sex is the same as Table 1. It's all the identified. The participants by age is determined upon entry into the program. So we take their birthday, we figure out how old they are on the date that they were entered into the program, and that's the age group that they are put into. As a student moves from year to year, if a student stays active, then the age group that they are put in is what they are active on July 1st of every year. So if a student was, say, 18 when they entered the program in April and their birthday isn't until November, then on one year they'll be an 18. In the following year, they would still be 18 due to the fact that their birthday has not lapsed yet. But if the student continues with adult education through that year and into the next year, the student will move then from the 18 age group into the 19 age group.
So would this be a useful tool in determining students that were K-12 eligible, or possibly not, because that band of 19 to 24 would catch some students that were not in your...
Yeah, so it would catch us for all of your 16 to 18. These are the students that are still K-12 eligible. Some of our special education students, the students who have special education needs, they can go up through the age of 22. So they're still eligible for K-12 services. This table would be good to do that. Every one of these NRS tables can be broken out into the details. Every one of these tables can be ran in Excel format as well as a PDF. So if you wanted to use this report for determining someone who is K-12 eligible, you can run the Excel version of this and use a filter option in order to capture those that are between the ages of, say, 16 and 22, and look for those that have special needs out of that population. Or just the 16 to 18-year-olds, they're still eligible for all the K-12 the K-12 services. Okay, moving on. Table 2A, as I was talking about in the definitions slide, this one is dealing with reportable individuals. Again, if you notice, it does look very identical to Table 2. The only difference is these students do not have 12 hours or they don't have a pretest, just one of the two options. They could not have either option and be reported on this. We're not sure the reason behind we're collecting this information as of right now, but this is a target area to kind of tell retention, to see which students aren't sticking around to gain up to 12 hours. This will also show you students that don't have a test inside of the system. But again, this is age group as well as demographic information. Again, same as Table 2A, or as Table 2.
Yeah, one of the questions that came up in our data administrators training was, at what point should you put a student into Utopia so that they can be a reportable individual? And our guidance was if they've completed the intake form, because if all you have is a student name and phone number, you don't have enough information to actually put them into Utopia and save them. But if they've completed the intake form, regardless of whether they ever come back and do testing or take any courses, you would want to enter that into Utopia so that they are counted in your reportable individuals.
Right. So just, again, as long as the student fills out the intake form, please enter the information in. It's a little different than some of older practices. Older practices where wait till they have 12 hours or wait till they have a test. We need to capture all this information as accurately as possible. So if a student comes in, you hand them the intake form, they fill it all out, and you get the intake form back, put all the information into Utopia. Speaking as a quick side note to intake forms, I was able to get 5 new languages for that intake form within the next week. I will be pushing those into PDF form and pushing them all out, so keep an eye out for that. I will also send an email when those are available to all programs. Table 3. Table 3 is quite a bit different than the first two. The first two dealt a lot more with demographic information, what the student's race is, what the gender is. Table 3 deals specifically with what type of program program type that the student is enrolled in. So you'll see that the 4 bolded areas: adult basic education, adult secondary education, English language acquisition, and integrated English language and civics education. Those are the primary groups that we're looking at. For the first 3, it is all dependent upon what the student's pretest is. So if a student takes an ABE ASE test, one of the CASAs or TABEs, and they score an ABE level 2, they're a low level, they would be put in the adult basic education line. If the student takes the same TABE or CASAS and they score an ABE level 5 or 6, they're put into the adult secondary education row. All of our ESL students are, as long as they take an ESL test, the CASAS or BEST, then they are put into the English language acquisition row. For the integrated English literacy and civics education, the IELCE line, in order for you to have access to this, you would have needed to put in for a grant. Danielle, can you explain a little bit more about IELCE?
Sure. So under WIOA, there's a carve-out for the IELCE funds. It's Section 243. And so in order to receive those funds, a program would have had to compete through them through the WIOA competition. We have many programs that receive federal funds under ABE, but just a handful that get the additional IELCE funds. They're required to have some specific components under that grant. So they have to provide, in addition to English language acquisition and civics education services, they also have to have an IET component. And you can see there's a spot for IET under each of the different categories because you can have IET outside of IELCE, but in order to have IELCE, you must have IET. And an IET program is one that combines adult education, workforce preparation, and workforce training. So putting students on a specific pathway.
Perfect. So if a program was awarded the IELCE grant, there's a flag inside of Utopia that I put on, that I activate, and what this does is this allows programs to identify the students as being a recipient of these funds. So if a class is being funded using these IELCE funds and the student is going to participate in that, there is a flag that you need to mark on these students. That takes primary over whatever their testing is, so we kind of want to see how many students are participating in these IELCE programs. As Danielle also mentioned, you can see that each one of these has an IET, an Integrated Education and Training Program line. This is not an individual count. And what I mean by that is if a student is in adult basic education because they scored an ABE, say 3 on their test, and they're also enrolled into an IET program, they will be in both the adult basic education as well as the integrated education and training line. Those are subsets of the line above. I hope that's as really as clear as mud as we can get it. If you have questions about this, what do I run an IET program? Both Danielle and Stephanie are more than happy to have conversations about, yes, this qualifies as an IET. For all students that do participate in an IET program, you do need to add a new registration for these students. You do it in the same place that you do an NRS registration. It's just a new registration type. It's titled Integrated Education and Training, and you put the date that they started and you start the new registration. Once they have that, the student will then be put onto the appropriate rows. You can also see that this is again broken out by age group. It's the same as Table 2 and 2A. The age is dependent upon what age they are when they start within the program. The final table that we're going to go ahead and talk about today is Table 4. Table 4 has a lot of information. This table specifically deals with measurable skill gains for students. The measurable skill gains, as we talked about before, students can gain measurable skills, MSGs, in one of two ways. They either do it through having gained an EFL gain, or they do it through obtaining their diploma or GED. I'll take a little bit and kind of explain each one of these columns. The columns are titled as appropriately as possible. These definitions for the definitions for each column are provided also by NRS. So if you look at it, so column A is the entering EFL. So this is all dependent upon the student's pre-test score. Same as table 1. So if they're on one line in table 1, they'll be on the same line in table 4. Column B deals with the number of participants. This is an individual unique count. So whether a student has more than one period of participation or not, they will only ever be counted once in column B. So when you run a table 4, you'll be able to see exactly how many students you've had in your program throughout the entire year. Don't worry about column C. We don't have any of our students that are excluded from an MSG performance. They need to follow certain guidelines, and none of our programs have any of that. Column D is the total hours of participation, so the total attendance hours. We just take the number of hours that all of these students have got, totaled it all up, and we put it in there. When you do run this, you'll see that this column is rounded to the nearest whole number. So if you have a secondary system that you are tracking and you want to make sure that all of your hours are entered in correctly, do beware that there is a little rounding involved in column D, and so it may not be 100% accurate. Do know that each student is being calculated correctly in the back end. It's just due to all the rounding that NRS requires us to do on making this a whole number. That's the reason that your numbers may not be 100% one-to-one across. Column E is where we take a look at our first MSG. As you can see, the title is the number who achieved at least one educational functioning level gain. And the way it's calculated is as long as a student earns that EFL, they'll be put into this line, or they'll be put into this column. Again, the EFL is whether a pre-post test, number of Carnegie, or number of credits earned within a year, or exit from adult education and enroll into post-secondary within the program year. So if they do any one of those, they'll be categorized in column E. Column F is the number of students who obtained a secondary school diploma or its equivalent. So this is your high school diplomas or GEDs. Now I will give a quick example. If a student starts, say they're on an ABE level 4, 40 hours into the program, they take their post test, they get a level gain. You run a table 4. You'll see on the ABE level 4 line, you'll see that they show up in column E. A couple months down the road, they go ahead and they achieve either their GED or diploma, whatever they're working on. The minute that they are marked as having achieved their diploma or GED, the student will move from column E to column F. Columns E, F, G, and H are all a unique count. So if you were to total up all of those columns, it will equal whatever the number of participants column B is. So a student can move from one column to one column, and this is because the MSG that the federal government is looking at is whatever their most recent MSG is. So if their most recent is that they got a diploma, they will be in column F. If their most recent is they got a level gain, they will show in column E. Column G is the number who have separated before achieving a measurable skill gain. So if you have a number of students who come, they eat pre-post test, or they leave before they're eligible to post test, they will show up in column G. And column H is all of your students who remain in the program without having achieved currently an MSG. Throughout the year, this will be kind of all of your active students who haven't achieved an EFL or their diploma. Once you get towards the end of the year after June 30th, this would be the number of students who was still active in your program on June 30th, but didn't receive an MSG throughout the year. Column I is the number who achieved a measurable skill gain. So this is calculated by taking columns E and F, adding those two numbers together and dividing it by the number of participants, column B. Columns J, K, L, and M all deal with the total number of periods of participation within the program year. So as we mentioned before, a student can have more than one period of participation throughout a year by having 90 days of separation of inactivity. And if they do, they come back, they can activate a second period of participation. So what column J, K, L, and M are looking at is what's happening throughout all of your periods of participation. So every student that shows up in column B will also show up in column J. Every student from column B that has a second period of participation will also be calculated in column J. So the total number in column J will be either equal to or greater than column B due to the number of periods of participation that row, those students who have that entering EFL has. Column K is the total number of periods of participation that they've achieved at least one EFL. So, for example, if a student comes in their first period of participation in the year, they'll go ahead and they make an educational functioning level through a pre-post test. They leave, they come back again, take another pre-test and a post-test later in the year. You could have an EFL gain twice for that student in both periods, in both their first pop and their second pop. So column K will be equal to or greater than column E. Column L is the same total number of periods of participation who've achieved their secondary diploma or their GED. Again, it will be either equal to or greater than column F. Column M is just a percentage of those who have achieved a period of participation. So it is column K plus column L divided by column J, the total number of periods of participation. There are additional table 4s. When you go into Utopia and you run some of these tables, you'll see a table 4A, 4B, 4C. We're not going to go over those at this time. Do keep in mind that those additional tables are breakdowns of table 4. For example, table 4A breaks down specifically column E. So if you want to know since there's 3 ways for a student to get an educational functioning level gain, an EFL gain, and you want to know which way they did it. Did they do it through a pre-post test? Did they do it through gaining, credits? How did my students actually do that? You can run a table 4A on your students, and that will break down. Go ahead and run those. The definitions are all up at the top on exactly what the table is showing, but they are breakdowns of what table 4 is. Table 4 is the primary. 4A, B, and C are all breakdowns. They're all dig downs. They're all additional information on what is held within table 4. Do we have any questions from anybody that is participating?
I don't have anything in the chat. I did want to add that there's a Canvas training available that dives into these NRS tables. Adam specifically highlighted these first few because I think they're the most helpful at the program level. But the NRS training will go through briefly all 10 so that you have a good feel for what we report at the federal level. And that is a required training for all adult education program staff to do annually, and something that we'll be looking for when we come out and do monitoring visits. So if you don't know how to access that, reach out to your program director because they should be able to add you to that course, or to your technical assistant, which would be Stephanie or Danielle. That's me. at the state office. And if you have additional questions, I know some of this federal alphabet soup can be a little crazy. We are happy to answer those. So reach out either to your technical assistant, or if it's Utopia specific questions, those can always go to the Utopia webmaster at schools.utah.gov.
Perfect, thank you. Yeah, again, if you need any help, you're more than welcome to email any one of us. If they're about these reports specifically, either why is a student not showing up or an explanation, you're welcome to email the Utopia webmaster email address and we'll go into it. Again, just as a reminder, every one of these tables can be ran with the details by running them in Excel format. When you do that, there will be a third tab on the Excel that's titled Details. It will break out all of these numbers, who's associated to which number. So if you see, in column B of table 4, you see that the ABE level 1 has 4 students and you want to know which 4 those are, you can run a details and actually break it down by that. So I think that's all we've got today. We'll go ahead and we'll do another training probably in January, February, kind of digging more into some of these federal tables as reminders and new trainings for some of our newer staff. And until then, thank you for participating. We'll go ahead and let everybody go, assuming there's no additional questions. All right, we'll go ahead and take an end. Thank you so much for participating, and we look forward to seeing you guys throughout the year. Thanks.